live so I can capture the audio, but appreciate everyone coming. I know we threw this on you last minute, so appreciate everyone joining for our discussion here on the Statement of Principles. We're really excited to have Victor here in the space. For those of you that I don't know, my name is Cameron Law. I serve as the Executive Director of the Carlson Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. I'm joined by Arlene on our team here, so she'll give the wave back there. And let's give her a shout out. Got the great spread and coffee and water for us. So thanks for nourishing us and getting us through the rest of the day here. But I'm really excited for this conversation. I had the first time I ever got to meet Victor was when I went on my 1 Million Cups Organizer Summit. So this was, I think, maybe 7 years ago. I got to see him talking for like the first time I really saw what ecosystem building actually was, and I could see the language that the work that we're doing. And I'm realizing everyone's like the good students, like way in the back. I don't know if we want to scooch our way up. I don't know, maybe it's the entrepreneurs, they weren't always the best in the classroom, so they sit at the back, but feel free. I swear we won't spit on you. But just a little more context was I got to meet Victor at the 1 Million Cups Organizer Summit. Just was inspired by this whole breadth of work around entrepreneurial ecosystem building and got to see that impact also here locally. And I was sharing with Victor earlier was, I looked up to Laura and Jeff throughout the years as ecosystem builders in our space and have learned ultimately in going through this work and got to then partner up with him through a new venture that he launched called Right to Start. And so I got to serve as I do serve as an ambassador here in the region and really with the intention to advance and remove barriers for entrepreneurs and getting started. And so he's going to share a little bit more about his tour that he's on here, and excited to have Sacramento as the second stop on this cross-country tour that he's on. But wanted to introduce Victor on up to share a little bit more about himself and his work with Right to Start, and then we're going to have a fireside chat and get into a great conversation. And so with that, let's welcome Victor to the stage.
Thank you, Cameron. So delightful to be here. So I am on a cross-country tour right now, and this is day number 2. And so we just kicked this off. I say we, it's me and my son right there, Augustine, in the middle of the bike. Augustine is like my marketing intern for this trip. And so we're driving across the country, and we're visiting with entrepreneurs and communities of entrepreneurs all across the country to hear their stories, learn what they're dealing with in this election year, and to take the message all the way to Washington and share the message of what entrepreneurs are thinking and talking about this year. So we're gathering stories about entrepreneurs, and we're also gathering signatures. And I'll tell you a bit more about that in a bit. So a story about Right to Start, who we are. We are a national, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization lifting the voices of entrepreneurs across the country in American life. And the issue that we're tackling is that entrepreneurship is actually critical to American renewal. There's this point now we feel in this country where the country feels like it needs to be refreshed, it needs to be rebooted. The entrepreneurs are the ones that build the new things, but you hardly hear entrepreneurship talked about in American life. And so you look at our national campaigns, you look at our local campaigns, you look at the major media, and entrepreneurs and those that are struggling, fighting to build something new, hardly make it into the American discussion. And so it's an election year, and this is a window of time when people are looking for new ideas, when the country's trying to figure out, where do we go, America? What are we trying to do? What do we believe in? And entrepreneurship has never been part of that conversation before. And so that's what we're trying to do this year, is to actually take that window and put ourselves into that conversation. So with Right to Start, what we really fight for is a world where everyone can realize their fundamental right to entrepreneurial opportunity. So we talk about right to start, just like you have a right to speech or a right to worship. Those are basic rights. We think of equal access to the ability to start and build your own business as a fundamental human right. That's a right that's never really been articulated before. People don't talk about it, but if you ask people who are in this work, we actually kind of believe it already. We believe this is core to what it means to be a human being, is to see something that needs to be built and to be able to build it and to have a fair fight to do so. We have the American system right now as a whole actually makes it tends to favor the bigger, the more established companies out there. tends to make it harder for the little person trying to build something new. And I should know, so I come from an entrepreneurial background myself. My parents started a business just to be able to afford to put me through college. And so I've seen the power of entrepreneurship to transform lives, including my own. And I've also been involved in starting businesses, investing businesses, growing businesses, and shutting down businesses on myself. So I've been involved in the entrepreneurial world. But I've also seen the power of entrepreneurship to lift up entire communities and transform societies. So my parents started their business, and I saw what happened with myself and my family and the people they employed in the company. But I also saw what happened in Austin, Texas, where they did it. In Austin, Texas, entrepreneurship is what lifted up an entire city and transformed the way of life in Austin, Texas. And I've gotten involved now where I get pulled into efforts across the world where the World Bank hires me to go to another country and design entrepreneurship and innovation activities and programs there. And I've seen how that transforms entire countries. So here we are in America, and I have been doing this work in entrepreneurship now for over 25 years and working with entrepreneurs and supporting them all across the ground. I used to be at the Kauffman Foundation where I ran the entrepreneurship department. Those of you that may or may not be familiar with this, the Kauffman Foundation has been the world's leading philanthropy in entrepreneurship now for about 3 decades. And so running that gave me a perspective on all the great things in entrepreneurship, but more importantly, where there was a gap. And the gap was this. In American life, when there's something that's really important, something fundamental, like your right to speech or whatever right you believe in, there's a voice for that in the system. There's an advocacy infrastructure that helps you fight for that right. So if one believes in guns rights, the NRA is that channel for lifting that voice up to fight for that issue. If you believe in civil liberties, the ACLU is a channel to lift that up. It's an infrastructure to fight for that voice. If you believe in the rights of entrepreneurs, there hasn't been anything. There hasn't been an infrastructure to get that voice lifted up. And the reason is that entrepreneurs have no time and no money to actually speak up for themselves. They're too busy hustling. They're too busy scraping away. They're too busy disadvantaged in the way things happen, which is the voice of the entrepreneur doesn't get heard in American life in general. And that translates all the way up to the way policies are set and the way governance, things get governed. And so, oh, hey, Eva. Great to see you. Thanks for making it. Oh, wow. So we are at a point now in American life where we need to get this voice heard because it's critical. And what the research now shows, that we didn't have this research 10 years ago, is that entrepreneurship is the source of almost all net job growth in an economy. So when people say, we need more jobs, the tendency in American life, in politics and the media, is to say, well, what are the big companies doing? Are they hiring more? But here's what the research shows. This is research from the National Bureau of Economic Research. Older companies shed jobs over time. New companies create more jobs as a net whole in society. So if you don't have new companies starting and building, you actually don't get net job growth. We also know entrepreneurs, people who build new businesses, get higher lifetime incomes. We also know it fights poverty. For every 1% increase in entrepreneurship in a state, it correlates to a 2% decrease in poverty rate in the state. We also know it fights inequality. The more entrepreneurial activity and access you have, the less inequality in the place. So we know it creates jobs, lifts incomes, fights poverty, raises GDP, raises incomes, yet it hardly gets talked about in American life. And so this is the moment we've got to start to do this, when America is looking for a reset. We're looking for a new direction. And so Right to Start launched 4 years ago now, and we are doing this work we're engaged with all 50 states right now. We have a footprint of ambassadors and advocates and people working on the ground in 30 states. We have a network of ambassadors. We have over 40 ambassadors, of which Cameron Law was one of our early ones. So thank you, Ambassador Law, for being this. And our ambassadors are community leaders that help us lift this issue up within the public sphere. And then we have grassroots organizers or advocates on the ground doing grassroots organizing, things like petition drives, meetups with policymakers to talk about the stories and the concerns that entrepreneurs have day to day. So we've been doing all that, and now we are starting to get some real momentum. So we've had 15 state legislatures. We've been around 4 years. 15 state legislatures have introduced over 40 Right to Start Act bills in legislatures already. We have 5 states now implementing Right to Start recommendations, including 2 states that actually had laws that went fully through the process and got signed into laws by governors. That's in Nevada and Missouri. Missouri is just a few weeks ago. And so we've got 3 states where the governor did it by executive action. And so what are these laws? Well, people say, what are the issues you care about? Well, the issue is that everything affects entrepreneurs. And so you can't solve it with just another program. It's actually everything from taxes and red tape to workforce training issues to education issues, to capital access, the government created an office of entrepreneurship or a director of entrepreneurship or something like that in charge of entrepreneurs. As part of that, they are actually starting to do things now like create reports to the governor and the legislature to make recommendations on how to reduce barriers for entrepreneurs of all kinds across their states. They're providing recommendations on how do you make government contracts more accessible for entrepreneurs in their states. And our goal is 5% of government contracts should go to young businesses in the state. It's not that much, it's 5%. But it's really hard to get to 5% because typically older established companies win those. And so you think about all these things, and that's what we're fighting for. And so right now, this is where I could use your help. We are gathering signatures to say, look, let's make this a priority in American life. And we're going to send these signatures. I'm taking them to Washington. I'm going to print them out, deliver them, hand deliver them to Congress, deliver them to the White House. And we're going to get this issue heard. And we're going to send these to all 50 governors across the country as well. And so what you have here is the statement of principles. I'll read this and then we'll go to the fireside chat. Is that right? All right. So this statement of principles, this is basically a statement that says we believe in entrepreneurship as an important issue in American life. And I'll read this for you. We are born to be starters, makers, doers, dreamers. Each of us has a fundamental right to realize an idea, create something of value, and pursue our entrepreneurial dreams. That simplest of ideas, that all of us have this right to start, is basic to the human condition. When that right is widespread, prosperity ripples across millions of lives in the form of jobs, productivity, dynamism, and opportunity. It's time to unleash that right in all of us, regardless of race, place, background, or walk of life. That means breaking down barriers and giving all of us opportunities to start, grow, and flourish. We agree with these principles and support policies to realize them. 1, everyone has a fundamental right to start. We have the right to pursue our entrepreneurial dreams and shape the destiny of our own lives. 2, we must protect and nourish starters. Society should provide fair access to resources for all of us to start and grow. 3, level the playing field, tilt it. Americans don't seek favors, but every starter deserves an equal shot to succeed. 4, renewal comes bottom up. Communities and nations are transformed by lifting up their people. 5, grow ecosystems to grow economies. Prosperity for all comes by breaking down barriers, fostering trust, bridging differences. And 6, all of us matter. Every big idea starts small and vulnerable and needs all of our help to grow. And so you can sign this statement with this QR code. So you could actually, and if you're willing to do it now, that'd be fantastic. If you sign it, you can sign in like seconds. It's all digital signature. And this becomes your way of joining us in this fight. We're going to get these signatures, we're going to share them out, and you become part of our movement to do this work across the country. So I hope you'll sign it if you haven't signed it already, and I hope you'll share it out with people. So you can take this home with you, and this becomes a way to remember this and also share this out with other people you know. So with that, I'm grateful for your interest in this work. I'm grateful for your support and interest in entrepreneurship, and really excited to be here. I've spent the day with Cameron and just been really jazzed about what's going on here. This city is at a remarkable time. There's so much happening here. The energy. This 20 years ago, I was here 20 years ago. This place wasn't happening like it's now. And now it's like there's so much on fire here, and I've just been excited to see it and excited to see this continue to grow in the future. So thank you all very much. And thank you, Cameron, for having me.
Buy some time for those signatures to come in. So our next portion here, we'll just do a little fireside chat and then open it up for questions on anything that you have questions for Victor, or if you have questions for me, I guess, as well. But I doubt that's the case.
I love that you're rocking a Hawaiian shirt with this. Like
you like that? That's like my.
That's very Hollywood.
It's very startup challengey. It's kind of how I. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then the like no sock look, right? Is that? So I don't know. You brought the SoCal vibes up, I guess.
Well, I brought you have to be like pretend to be respectful in case like a politician's watching you.
I love it. Awesome. So just in kind of kicking it off, so we'd love to start with, what got you into this work, especially, having been a founder and CEO in prior ventures and then now turned into ecosystem building and, really were a leader in kind of defining the entrepreneurial ecosystem building space. What led you to jumping into this space and particularly launching Right to Start?
Well, it was really, when you get to a place like the Kauffman Foundation, you get a different perspective on things, because when you're outside of that, you do your work at a regional level and you do great work, and you always think, well, surely someone is doing something, to handle that bigger set of questions around how do we change the way economic development is done, how do we change the way that workforce is done, or whatever, you name it. And when you finally get to Kauffman and you look around, you realize there actually isn't anyone doing that stuff, and that there's a huge hole in American life, that every issue has that kind of momentum to sustain itself, except for such an important issue like entrepreneurship. And even as a result of that, we know what the data says, which is that entrepreneurs say the system is unfair. So 82% of entrepreneurs say that the government favors big corporations over entrepreneurs, and 69% say government doesn't care at all about entrepreneurs. And so there's this fundamental, people who are in the business of starting and building businesses know it's really not a fair fight. And so I realized that someone needed to build this thing this country needed it deeply. And so at some point in the entrepreneurial journey of everyone, you look around and you think, well, who's going to do it? And no one's doing it. And you realize it's up to you to do it. And so that was year 2000. It was actually late 99 going to 2000. So we just decided to do it and give it a shot. And we weren't sure what this was going to look like at all when we started. Like, we didn't even know how to talk about this stuff.
Yeah. And just a quick, how many people are now at Right to Start? Not necessarily ambassador network, but like on the actual team. In terms of like your own startup, how many people are on the team?
Full-time team now is 10 people. So it's grown. It's starting to grow faster and faster. Like, for the first 2 years, volunteer labor, contract labor, little bits here and there. Then 2 years in, we started to get people on full time, and now we got 10. So now it's starting to really get traction now.
So the next question I had is, what does ecosystem building mean, and what role do you see it playing in advancing the principles of Right to Start? I think it was maybe the 5th one on there. You said I'd have to look back, but there was a specific point on ecosystems as a driver for this work. So I'd love to learn more about what that looks like. And ecosystem building's been thrown around now as kind of a very jargony term. So I'd love to get your context.
Right. It's so interesting that it now it's like crossed from like, oh, that's an interesting concept, to now it's like jargon. And I've watched that whole journey go. And so are all of you familiar with the ecosystem term? Does everyone know what it means? Some of you don't. So all of you sort of know. But basically, the idea is that economies are not like farms where you can plant companies, right? They're complex systems, which means they're messy. And so if you just try to farm companies, it doesn't work. Just like in a real forest, you can't farm trees and expect a forest to thrive. It's the whole system itself. And so all of it interacts together. It's the soil conditions, it's the sunlight, it's the humidity, it's the nutrients in the soil, it's the interaction between all the flora and fauna together that cause plants to grow. The same way in the entrepreneurial journey, it's not just, you can't just solve, say, you can't just create more funds and expect entrepreneurs to thrive in a community. It's the connections to corporate partners, supply chain partners, media partners, lawyers, accountants, other entrepreneurs, other founders who want to be able to mentor you. Like, all these things matter in the entrepreneurial cycle. So it's called an ecosystem, which is just like the full 360-degree system that requires entrepreneurs to be nurtured. And so that shift has really happened over the last decade in thinking about entrepreneurship not as a point solution. You can't just create one program and expect you're done, but to think of it as a whole ecosystem problem. I wrote a book on this called The Rainforest, which is about that idea that rainforests, just like rich natural systems, are just like human economies. And if you want to build, you got to create rainforests. And the way you build rainforests is by shaping environments. So where that leads now to Right to Start is, I actually had some folks say, that seems like a totally different thing, to go from ecosystem building to policy and civic activism. And it's actually the same thing. It's just looked at it from the different side. So ecosystem building is for people on the ground level, building the communities and the support structures for the entrepreneurs. But then the question is, well, how do you embed that within an institution? How do you embed that into the fabric of society so it lives on forever? And so the work of Right to Start, by making it a basic, calling out the human rights issue, we're actually looking at we're answering this question, how do you embed this into the way economic development is done? How do you embed this into the way education is just done? How do you embed it into the way that workforce training is just done? Because right now it's not. And so we're trying to shift the fundamental narrative in each of these distinct domains that actually should all be about how do we spark and support the entrepreneurial spirit in America, as opposed to how do we do more workforce training, right? It should really be about how are we helping people realize new ideas to make things better, not just how do we train more workers, which is a very narrow way to look at it. And so that's where it all plays together, which is you can't, if you want to do ecosystem building at full scale, you've got to learn to build it into the very institutional fabric of a society. And so that's where Right to Start comes in.
So as we look at innovation and entrepreneurial development, particularly as a driver for economic development, can you share more about the role this plays in building regions and ultimately to advance that particular work? And so both from maybe a policy perspective, but maybe some things that you've seen in other regions where they built a thriving ecosystem around entrepreneurs and maybe had some intentional strategies to do so.
Yeah, so what this looks like at the regional level is, in cities now, creating, if you're a city government and you're trying to figure out a place to help entrepreneurs, well, why not have a one-stop shop so entrepreneurs can figure out how to navigate the whole system? And so right now in very few cities, entrepreneurs get bounced around. Like I'm looking for help, and you fill out this form, pay this fee, and they bounce you to another department. So we know someone that bought a food truck and wanted to start a food truck. It took them 1 year to get through all the fees and forms and permits before they can sell anything out of the food truck. So that's a year of lost revenue for the entrepreneur. It's a year of lost taxes for the city and the county and the state. And it's a year of people not having the benefit of whatever that food truck was going to make. So the end of making society better was lost. So all that opportunity cost in the system. And so in places like Kansas City now, there's actually a window in City Hall. You walk into City Hall and you turn left, and there's one window for the licenses and permits, and there's the window right next to it is called BizCare. So it's essentially to help you navigate the whole system, including the other window. So you go in one window, it tells you how to navigate fees and licenses and permits and government contracts, and also accessing mentoring programs and resources and educational efforts, like all those things through one doorway in the city. It's like a revolution, but it makes a ton of sense if you think about it. Like there should be a place where people that are trying to create jobs and create better services and products for their community should be supported and should have open doors like that. So that's one simple example at the local level. And then on the state level and the regional level, you can think about this applying, same issues can apply at the county level, same issues apply at the state level. And so this is stuff that works anywhere. You can take those basic ideas and do a bunch of different things like that.
And a follow-up on that, I think one of the things as we look particularly at the Sacramento region, I don't know if this is unique to our region, but when we look at the greater Sacramento region, it's 6 counties with I don't know how many municipalities that all have different processes, and then also look at supporting entrepreneurship differently, and oftentimes is very focused on a particular jurisdiction when we would look at entrepreneurs are very transient in terms of how they leverage resources across a particular region. Is there a way that you've seen that done, or maybe even through the Right to Start kind of framework where you are looking at policies that are for that particular municipality, but really having a greater regional impact and kind of opening those resources up?
Well, it's tricky because governments don't talk to each other and they all have different voters, and so I think there's a real opportunity to think about doing what startups do, which is leaning. They lean, and what corporations do is they lean, they streamline, they make things more efficient. And not a lot of people know, but what they did in Colorado and Denver is they created a lean academy in the government to train civil servants up on how to do lean, how to make government processes lean, just like entrepreneurs have to talk lean, just like businesses have to do lean. What every Fortune 500 company has done, the state of Colorado actually tried to institutionalize that within their public service sector. And so that was one place, but then the city of Miami copied it They created a Lean Academy in Miami to streamline the process of business starting and registration, like their business use permits. And they took what would have been, we heard stories of like 6 months and 30 visits to City Hall to be able to get a business started in Miami, to streamlining it, to doing it on your cell phone in a matter of hours or days without having to go to City Hall once. So that's the shift that they made using a lean process in city government. And so there's no reason that can't be done everywhere. And you think of the time that saves for entrepreneurs, you think of the speed to market for new products and services, it can have a profound difference if more people did that.
So, when we look at doing this work, in the room we have a mix of entrepreneurs, ecosystem builders, people that are supporting the entrepreneurial mindset and spirit, whether that's say on campuses or across the region. What can we do to advance removing these barriers to entrepreneurial opportunity, and particularly through the lens of, if you're an entrepreneur, you're working and you don't have the time, and then also, maybe you're running programs and you're also trying to ecosystem build, how might we advance some of this work with limited time and capacity and resources?
Well, it's the shift that has to happen. So the field, economic development as a field, has it really emerged out of the idea that you needed to put together regional efforts to attract large corporations. And so that became the basis of economic development for half a century. And that still happens, but there's only 200 of those projects a year in the whole country. It's like those big attraction projects. And so what's happened is most cities now realize there's not enough of those big projects to be worth their time and money, especially rural areas or smaller towns realize they can't get them. And so what's happened is they've realized that you've got to build your own. Homegrown business is actually essential to economic development. And so that shift now is happening in the entire field of economic development. The realization that true long-term economic development cannot just be about big company attraction, retention, and subsidies. You have to build your own, and you have to support homegrown entrepreneurship. So that within economic development as an industry now, they're now doing entrepreneurship-led economic development, ecosystem building support, and embedding that within the fabric of the way economic development can efficiently be done. They're still learning how to do it more and more, but that is a huge shift in that thinking. And I think over time, if all net jobs come from entrepreneurs, if you can fight poverty, if you can help reduce inequality, create incomes, create rippling wealth throughout an economy, that has to be the way you do economic development. And that narrative now has to continue to build up and get out there.
How do you see that proportion of work of the attraction versus retention, and then also fostering new homegrown? What would that, I don't know if you could break it into a third, or what would that look like in terms of an impactful strategy, or would it be obviously maybe dependent on the region, but curious of thoughts on that.
Yeah, it does depend a lot on the region, and but they polled the people in economic development. I remember even a couple of years ago, the International Economic Development Council polls its members and says, what are the most important issues in economic development? And number 1 and 2 are workforce and entrepreneurship. Those are number 1 and 2. So the people in the work know it's an issue. It's that the field didn't have the tools and the policy incentives and momentum to make it happen. So it actually is something people know, but they're not sure what to do about it. And so I think this is where ecosystem building and the kinds of issues we're talking about in Right to Start to make a difference. Because if it's that important and they don't know what to do, well, we can tell them what to do. There's a lot of great things to do that have been vetted and proven and have traction. And that's the opportunity right now, is to start to provide a whole new way, a second approach to economic development. Is it 50-50? Is it 1/3? I don't know. I think every place has to come up with its own thing, but we should be able to walk and chew gum as a society, right? We should be able to figure that out. And every place has to come up with its own combination of walking and chewing gum.
And not trip on our feet, or
not fall down
fair
flat.
enough.
Yeah.
Just a couple more. So if you have additional questions, we'd love to bring those in. So entrepreneurial ecosystem building and development, it certainly takes time. And oftentimes these results can take decades to be visualized, and oftentimes you might not even see the fruits of any of that labor. And as Brad Feld or Ian Hathaway would say, it's like you're building 20 years from today, every day. How do you recommend leaders that are advancing this work do so and tell the story in an impactful way when we might not see the impact of that program or initiative in for 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, it's hard to run for office and say, "Don't worry, you'll know I was right in 20 years." So you have to be able to show progress now. The thing we found, one of the things recently we found that actually is quite interesting and useful, and politicians seem to find useful, is when you create an office of entrepreneurship or someone to lead entrepreneurship in your city or state, have them issue an annual report every year that says, here are the recommendations by talking with the entrepreneurs and those in the entrepreneurial community on what we can do to break down barriers for entrepreneurs. And that lets you the following year come back and say, look what we did. And we can actually tackle the things that the community is telling us to do. This idea comes out of the actually the capital work, because the SEC, which is the lawmaking body at the federal level that sets securities laws for fundraising, to put it simply, they actually have an Office of Small Business Capital Formation Advocacy. It's the longest title. And they actually have an annual report where they interview people, entrepreneurs out there, and say, what are the issues around, what are the regulatory barriers for fundraising that you'd like to see changed? And they take these recommendations every year, they issue an annual report, and then they talk to the SEC staff on how to make those better, and they report to the public on what the results are every year. They've been doing that now for about 6-7 years now. And it's just tracking. You can see the difference every year about the difference that they make, and you can start to see the laws and the rules that are changed every year. And so that becomes almost like a thermometer, a barometer every year of progress. And so something like that, where you create your own internal reporting system, providing recommendations to government, and then showing the barometer of progress every year is useful. The other piece that they're doing in these offices of entrepreneurship is to track data around entrepreneurial activity, because amazingly enough, there's actually very bad data on entrepreneurship, and people are often surprised when I say that. But we have lots of great data on big corporations. We have very little data on people starting new things, because if you think about it, people start new things, over napkins in coffee shops, in their basements, in their bedrooms, in their garages. That doesn't show up in a lot of reporting. And so when something emerges small, it's kind of unknown and invisible. But the problem is that data is critical for being able to know how successful you are in supporting entrepreneurial activity. So better data to figure that out is actually a big piece going forward too.
All right, the last question I have, and then we'll open it up to any other questions, was as we move from kind of like the local and regional discussion to state and national, what trends, either positive or negative, do you see taking place around supporting entrepreneurial opportunity? And what might we be thinking or asking about in the November election as it pertains to entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial opportunity?
The trends we're seeing are, the momentum is building around entrepreneurship. So we did a bipartisan poll recently where we hired 2 of the top pollsters in the country, one from the left and one from the right. So it's kind of a purple poll. And we asked American voters, what do they think about entrepreneurship? And this data was pretty powerful. It basically says 94% of Americans say it's important to the future of the country that everyone has a fair opportunity to start and grow a business. In a time when we're supposed to be polarized and don't agree on anything, this is a really unifying issue. And then we also asked them, well, is it difficult to start and grow a business? 92% of Americans said it's difficult, and half of those said it's very difficult to start a business today. So we're also unified on that. And we also found that people are very unified in terms of what you can do about it. And so when you ask people, if you're going to start a business and you didn't, what are the reasons you weren't able to start a business? They will point, half of people will say it was either too much red tape, it costs too much. The US actually costs on average over $700 to start a business. In like Canada, Switzerland, Brazil, China, it's under $100. So we cost a lot to start a business here. It's also healthcare access. They're afraid of losing healthcare. About half of people say it's healthcare. And about half of people say they don't know where to get the information from. They're not sure where to start. Oh, and then 3/4 of people say they can't figure out how to get any money to start it. So there's a real lack of capital to be able to start and try things out. And so there's a sense deeply that this is an issue that needs to be tackled. This is also an issue that politicians don't know they should care about, because people like us aren't speaking up about it. So in our poll, we asked people if they'd be more likely to vote for a candidate that talked about making it easier to start and build businesses. 62% of Americans said they prefer candidates, and they'd be more likely to vote for candidates that talk that way. But what happens is politicians don't know that unless we speak up, and the entrepreneurs just don't speak up because they're too busy, and they're time strapped, they're cash strapped. And so this is the work we're trying to do, is to even if we can speak up a little bit, if all of us do it together, we actually can have a voice in the system. So I think this election year, when the window is opening for fresh ideas, new direction for the country, is the chance to start talking with people, talk to civic leaders, political leaders, and just leaders of the community, that this is important. We need to elevate it. It needs to be at the front of our economic agenda to make lives better. And just getting that conversation going everywhere you can is going to make a huge difference.
All right. Franklin's got the hand raised. Here we go.
I follow the rules.
That's why you're in the front seat.
So I got kicked out of the back row. So we met earlier, Victor. Franklin Russell is SMUD, sixth largest public utility in America that's publicly owned. I'm in the Economic Development Department. I work with the entrepreneurship ecosystem. Within our larger department called Sustainable Communities, there's another department. It's called Workforce. We do a lot of stuff around manufacturing, typical 30 jobs, and clean energy future jobs. So you mentioned the two. You kind of intimated maybe there's two shades of gray there, or are they black and white, or what is your perception of the interplay that should be between those?
They should be shades of gray. They are treated as black and white in America. So the workforce industry, right, came out of essentially, the 70s and the 80s, sort of the decline of the Rust Belt. And so how do you retrain workers for the new jobs of the future? Right now, the system is designed, if you follow the way it's designed from like the federal money on down, the WIOA money, the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act money, $13 billion of federal money that drives the entire agenda of workforce in America. The federal money goes to the states allocated to workforce development boards across their states. If you actually look at the incentives, here's an example. If someone goes through a workforce training program and says, you know what, I'm not actually gonna take that job in a big company, I'm gonna start my own business. And if they create 10 new jobs from that workforce program, that's considered a failure by the metrics of the workforce program today, because workforce measures it by, are you filling a job, not are you making a job. You can make 10 jobs, and that's worse for the workforce system than it is if you fill one job. So it's perverse, right? The incentives are essentially last century's incentives. And so this is a big shift, which is, can we start to change the way workforce boards prioritize entrepreneurship within there? Can we change the way that states measure success of workforce? Can we change the way federal government incentivizes states and local workforce boards to do more entrepreneurial training as part of it? It doesn't mean it has to be all of it, but the way it's done now is most workforce boards are dominated by people who have the time to be involved, which tends to be people with corporate interests. And it's not bad. They're doing HR for corporations to build workforce. And so they're building jobs to train them to fill existing jobs.
Labor trades or something.
For the labor trades. Yeah, it's to fill existing jobs, really, is what they're looking for, as opposed to create net new jobs in an economy. And that's a fundamental flaw in the way we thought about workforce, which is if the new jobs come from new companies, then at least part of workforce should be allowing and supporting new company formation, but it never has. And in fact, the states are generally penalized for doing so. So fundamental problem, and it's a big challenge. And but we could here's an example we could do. Entrepreneurs could actually get appointed to workforce boards. Like we could start doing that across the country. And so this is, we haven't done that yet, but this is something that we could do prospectively, is to actually start getting entrepreneurs to talk to their mayors and their state representatives to get appointed onto workforce boards everywhere. And then they can start to shift the way those monies get allocated. And so that could go to entrepreneurial support programs, to mentoring programs, to ecosystem building efforts all across the country, if we start to shape the way those boards are run.
Thank you.
Laura.
Hey, Laura.
Hi.
Good to see you. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. So my question is around the type of businesses. And just to give a little background, when I first started working at a nonprofit that supported entrepreneurs in the greater Sacramento region, the focus was all on high-tech companies, developing tech companies. And then when Jeff and I started Startup SAC, that's kind of where we were as well. But I would say our involvement with the Kaufman Foundation through 1 Million Cups and Fast Track, and I forget what we call those big conferences that the eShip conferences, we really changed our thinking and started sort of, singing the song of, entrepreneurship is a valid strategy for economic development. But, and that it didn't have to be a scalable technology company to make a difference, although we still primarily are working with technology startups. And part of that reason is that's what the local governments want to see, is like the next big Apple or the next big this, and there isn't as much support for kind of the mom and pop business, the brick and mortar business. And yeah, I'm kind of confused. I don't actually know like which is better and where should I spend my time and what should local agencies focus on. And I wondered if you had any wisdom to share on that.
Scars, not wisdom, but it's the issue. The answer has to be all the above. And I know that's not the easiest answer, but it has to be. And the reason is because, well, several reasons. If you just do tech-based scalable entrepreneurship, that's essentially 1% of all the businesses out there. And so you have no political muscle anyways. And I was with, the Lieutenant Governor of Michigan recently, and he himself was a high-tech startup entrepreneur. And he said, look, I can't talk about that as the Lieutenant Governor because I have to talk to all entrepreneurs, everyone, I'll have to talk to all citizens in the work. And so when you talk about high-tech only, it's hard to build policy strength around that because people think of it as a 1%. It's a 1%er problem. You're helping people of privilege, even though it may not be, but they think of it, it's viewed that way. The other element to that is 91% of businesses are tech-enabled businesses now. And so things can scale rapidly that you don't think are going to be scalable tech businesses. You think about, you think about so many companies that have exploded in the last few years, from companies that make inflatable mattresses, like foam mattresses, to companies, hotels, like taxis. They're taking old line industries and transforming them. And I think the transformation of a lot of old industries to new industries using tech-enabled tools is actually where you see that crossover. So if 91% of businesses are tech-enabled businesses now, the line between tech and non-tech is much blurrier than it used to be. And so one, we need political muscle to kind of have a unified story around the entrepreneurial spirit. Two, almost all businesses are tech-enabled businesses anyways. And the truth is, the entrepreneurs themselves don't really think of that distinction, right? It's people within our sector kind of get worked up over that distinction. A third, I lost my train of thought on that, but it was a good one. So I think it's really important to start to think about it as one story. Oh, the third is the example. So Mr. Kaufman's the example I use. So Mr. Kaufman's example. So Mr. Kaufman, who created the Kaufman Foundation, by the 1980s, he had one of the most innovative biopharmaceutical companies in America. A $6 billion company acquired by Merrill Dow. It was based in Kansas City. And it became, the great philanthropy that supported entrepreneurs across the world. What people don't remember about that biopharmaceutical company is it was started in 1950 selling health supplements from the trunk of his car. And those health supplements included grinding oyster shells in his living room manually, putting them in little bags and selling them to hospitals as calcium supplements for patients. And that became one of their leading products. And it's still actually one of the leading products, a leading product today on the market. So in 1950, was that a venture-backable business? Is that something that you would have gotten like high-tech companies or even biopharma companies interested in? Not at all. And it took a good couple decades for that thing to turn into something of like real high growth value. And so the lens we have today of like, well, this is tech and that's not tech, and we put them on the cool kids accelerated track, or we'll put them on the remedial class, which is the way it's happened. It's failing the entrepreneurs because we're condemning people to one path early in their life cycle. When Mr. Kaufman, you wouldn't have known it at the time that he was going to build a great pharmaceutical company. And so we have to create this path. A full ecosystem allows for that integration. Like, hey, I'm building a retail product, but you know what? I'm getting real traction here. I think this is starting to scale up. I need venture capital. I need access to biopharma partners. Or vice versa. Hey, we're trying to scale this business, but you know what? It's turning into like a pretty, stable business. We're not going to get a hockey stick growth. We're just going to flatten out. But we need the resources around how to run a stable, 20 employee company. So what we've done is we shouldn't bifurcate them. We should really think of it as a whole. But I know that's challenging But ultimately, that's how entrepreneurs think of it. They kind of wind between these paths, and you never know where it's going to go. But it's a big shift in the way it's done, has been done traditionally, which is you're in the accelerated class or you're in the remedial class, and we just can't keep doing that. It hurts our cause to do it that way. Is that?
Yeah.
How's that? Yeah.
Thank you.
What other questions?
Hi, I'm Kevin North. I moved to California this year because I was a software developer in Nebraska and I want to work for a startup. And I know there are more startups in the Central area than there are in the Midwest. So I've thought about this question for a while and I've been thinking, how do I make it not sound like a complaint? But I think it is a complaint and I'm just going to own that. I have been trying to find a job with a startup for over a year now, and I just haven't had any luck so far. And I've worked for the past 8 years for a 2,000 employee company that's in a very traditional market. And I think that part of what's going on, not the whole picture, but part of it is that since I'm coming from a traditional non-startup background, a lot of startups are seeing my resume, seeing that they don't have experience with startups, and instead going to people who have been a part of this community for a long time. So I'm having a hard time breaking into this community. I don't want to say that I have to give up or that it's a fundamental problem with the system. I moved to Sacramento so they can attend events like these, meet more people, and help refine our way into the community. But I wanted to bring up that my perspective as somebody who doesn't want to start a business, but work for somebody who has, I found that it's been a little difficult to break into the community and get that first startup job that then makes it easier for me to go to other startups when that company succeeds or fails. So I just wanted to share that perspective with you.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, you've got a lot of people in the room that could probably help you and connect you to resources and opportunities. I would offer this. I barely know you, but this is just a quick reaction, which may be totally off base. So I'll just qualify that. But I think to get into the entrepreneurial startup world, the way you're talking about it is almost like a black or white thing. It's like you're either working for the man or you're working for a startup. And I think the way that might work better is to think of it as shades of gray, which is, can you start taking a few hours a week to get involved with the startup on the side and start helping out a few of them, three of them, pick 3 that you think are pretty interesting, and start offering your time and your help without any expectation of really getting anything paid for at first, because early on, they really don't have much money, and so they can't hire that many folks. But then build your own little portfolio of companies that you think you're interested in helping out. Offer your help and time for free. When one of them starts to take off, you're going to be the first person they turn to actually get more of your time. And so it'll actually go from an hour or 2 a week, and if it starts to work, it becomes 5 or 10, or eventually a full-time role. So I think that shades of gray is a much better way to think of the entrepreneurial process than it is black or white. That's just my quick reaction on that. Yeah, you're welcome. Well, this is the thing too. I think a lot of what's happened in the startup scene is that we think of it as like Shark Tank. Like you're either in, you have permission to go in, or you're kind of on the outside. And the truth is, I think my experience has been most startups kind of start as like ideas that start to bubble up, and people start to put in a little time, they experiment, they're side hustles, and those side hustles start to become big hustles, they start to become bigger things. And so I think we almost, by over mythologizing it, we create a problem. We should actually think of it as almost like it's so casual, it almost is unnoticeable when you float into a new enterprise. It's just, you're getting involved, it starts to work, and you just get more involved. That's the way I think of it.
Did you want to share the biz tech, or is it a question?
I always have questions.
Oh, I'll get to your question. If you haven't, I think I appreciate what you shared. One, I'll take it as a call to action to see how we better can connect you. But also, I want to point out, Laura helps curate an event called Biz Tech Mixer, which is bringing really the startup and the tech ecosystem. And I think we haven't done a great job in the Sacramento region until now to really bring those two communities together. So you have maybe more of the tech oriented, where it's people that are tech focused, but maybe not building startups, and they're looking for that opportunity. And so I highly recommend checking out those mixers and other meetups related to that. So
Kevin has been to at least one.
there you go. So
I will add on that too. I have a friend who is a headhunter for technology jobs, and it's a really bad time right now for software developers. There isn't a lot out there, so I think it's not just you like being snubbed. Like people right now, it's kind of I won't say a depression or a recession, but maybe after the election it might change.
Okay.
Eva,
This gentleman has had it first.
Jeff, you had a question first?
Just a comment. I really appreciate your work. I went into my history, but I at one time worked with the Franchise Tax Board. And one of the things that we understood was that small businesses pay the most in tax as a group, but they're the least represented because you don't have super PACs, you don't have these kinds of organizations. So it's really refreshing to hear what you're doing because it's exactly what we knew was a gap 5, 6, 8 years ago now, maybe. And so if you could coalesce a voice with that largest tax base to really be able to drive policy changes around WIOA, like you're suggesting, or other policy mechanisms, I think that would be, I'm really hopeful to see where you go with this.
Yeah, so that's great. You're involved. You consider yourself drafted because that's actually the franchise tax board's an issue. The $800 minimum franchise tax, that's exorbitant, and I don't know any other state at that level. And so if you think about what that means, is we've made limited liability a privileged activity in California when it should be democratized. Right. That's actually something you want people of limited means to have more access to. Instead, the people who can afford are those that can pay $800 a year, which that may seem like nothing to someone of means, but for the average American, that's a ton of cash for several years before they really get a real profit going. So, but you're right. The issue is because no one's raised it before, right? And the person that's paying it doesn't have the means to say, this is a lot. Like, can I defer that? Can we amortize that out into the future? Like something, right? It seems like such a logical question to ask that no one's ever asked in California before. Yeah, so yes. Right, yeah, $800 for someone breaking even for the first few years while they're trying to start their own plumbing business it's cruelty, really, right? So yes, absolutely.
I was gonna ask a question about, since I know you, Victor, and I know your methodologies, and I do in Chico several times. I was going to ask you to maybe share with the group. Is this the first time he's like hosted? Is this the first time? Okay. Share with the group perhaps that all change is linguistic, right? And how creating that common, I seem to remember that, I didn't steal it from you, I stole it from Todd, but and that's some of the fundamental work that gets done when you're first building the ecosystem. You and Todd talk a lot about that. So I would just say maybe share that with the group as well.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. And Eva, you've been kind enough to invite me a few times to Chico to help out with the great work you're doing there. Ultimately, everything we're talking about is the stories we tell ourselves as a society, right? It's, what is possible. And I think if you think of, I've been lucky enough to travel the world doing this kind of work for a lot, and I've seen the difference between this place. I've seen the difference between parts of this country, and I've seen the difference between parts of this country and the rest of the world. And the truth is, in most of the world, the story that they tell themselves is, well, somebody ought to fix that. And in this country, one of the fundamental stories we tell ourselves has been, oh, well, we should fix that, right? I feel like this country sort of at that moment now, we're trying to figure, are we a country where we ask that, or do we ask that other question? Like, is it someone else's fault or is it our fault? And I think this applies at the local level too. When you see a problem, I've been to most places in the world will be like, well, somebody should fix that. Somebody, right? The powers that be, the people of means, whatever. Yeah, somebody else should do that. And in this country, it's like, well, we say that too. We complain and point fingers. At the same time, there is enough of this population that says, well, we should do something about that. And they kind of get together, they organize, and they start to put together an effort to make things better. That is really the spark of what makes this country ultimately different, is that story. that fundamental difference that clicks in your head about, well, we should do that, or we should fix that, or we have the means to do that, is the key. And so when you're trying to get ecosystems going, a big part of it is to get people together to surface that new narrative, right? So if it's like a narrative of like negativity, where they're saying, well, it's just never gonna fix, it's too hard, right? You hear this a lot, like, oh, well, those people will never agree to that. Those are all things we hear when you're trying to make things better. What you want is to get a group of people together to realize they actually all care about the same thing, and all the people that need to fix that problem are actually in that room together. And I've seen this happen now. I remember I was in Brazil once. This was Porto Alegre, Brazil, in the south of Brazil, which is like cowboy country in the south of Brazil. And the time it took to start a new business there was like 4 months. And it was permits issued by the city government. 4 months starting a business with like $10,000 minimum bank account requirements, just awful stuff. And we brought together a session, and it was like the mayor, the people in the city working on this problem, the entrepreneurs, the community. And at some point, I had this realization, well, everybody that actually could fix this problem is actually in this room right now. They're just not saying that they can fix the problem. They're all finding reasons to kind of avoid the problem or not fix it, but they're all sitting there right in the room. And so I tried to get that going within Porto Alegre, but of course, one conversation is not enough. You need to get a series of dialogues going. But the realization that in this country, especially in a town of this size, you can actually get everybody in the room that you need to fix a problem. And can you create a new story to wrap around that and get them going? And so in Chico, we were able to do that. We got the community to work together on picking, a handful of things to work on together that the community kind of voted on, like, these are the things we should tackle, and here's the ways we're going to tackle them. But it's essentially you support the dialogue to change the narrative.
Laura, you had your hand raised.
If there's someone else. let them know.
Anyone else have an additional question? Well, maybe you'll spark another one for
All
someone else.
So I've been following an organization called Engine for a while. That's a lobbyist group, usually around making it easier for entrepreneurs. And I wondered if you have interaction with them, if your missions are aligned, what you could tell us about that.
Yeah, Engine's great. There's so few folks doing this stuff anyways, so we're all friends. We all love each other and support the work. They're great. They tend to do more tech and innovation focus, and that's great too. And that's DC based. And so it's tech and innovation, policy recommendations in tech and innovation, of which there's a very strong entrepreneurial component. And so a lot of our issues and ideas overlap with theirs. And so we work with them on stuff. We've signed joint letters with them on things to support federal initiatives and things like that. So yes, and so there's so few groups that we just all support each other. It's the entrepreneurial spirit. We're all trying to help each other raise the barn together. Our work is unique in that we're very much bottom up, and we do think about entrepreneurship as a unifying cause across sectors of entrepreneurship, across party lines, and so we're more about bottom up activism and advocacy than kind of research at the federal level and national level.
The library will be closed in 30 minutes. Please return any remaining library materials.
Nice. Wow, that's like, those are pretty harsh librarians here.
They speed up their cadence over the evening, so I actually didn't know they'd start this soon.
It's like
so.
if you have a late book, what penalties are they charging you here?
But no, I wanted to, I guess, see your reaction. No, I had forgot about it. Sorry, were you done with the question?
Yeah, I think so, unless that makes sense.
I have sort of another question
Okay.
around a particular policy in California that I'm really angry about. And that is AB 5, which
It's the independent
Makes it-
contractor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like you can, there's
Maddening.
hardly anything you can do as a contractor, and it really hurts
Yeah.
startups.
Yeah.
And what really makes me mad is that it was originally kind of targeted at like Uber, but now there's like legislation that lets like the Uber drivers be contractors, like separate from AB 5, I believe. Anyway.
So they dodged the bullet,
Yes.
and now everyone else got hit by the
Yes. So,
that's worse.
that's the kind of legislation that, I won't say it ties the hands of entrepreneurs, because basically what they've told me is well, I'm just not gonna pay attention to it, and if I get caught, I get caught, hiring someone as a contractor, which, has its.
Well, it's a shame we have to do that, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. But, I mean, are you guys working on those kinds of things at all, or is that like too high level and not grassroots enough?
Oh, no, we are watching that issue because it's, what happened with California and AB5, it got taken up to Supreme Court, which became the ABC test, right? And now that got taken up by the Department of Commerce. So it's actually a proposal at the national level, which has been slowed down because there's going through a lot of discussion. We have been watching it, and it is quite burdensome. The challenge with it is we've got so many things to work on it right to start that are unifying issues as opposed to polarizing ones, and that one is actually kind of a polarizing issue because there's a lot of constituencies that get very fired up about it. So it is on our radar, and we do care about it, but we've got a bunch of things we want to take off faster that actually generate momentum, and then once you get the momentum, we can start to tackle some of those bigger issues. But I do think it's a real concern around independent contractor laws. So far at the federal level, the momentum seems to have stopped. So that's good. But because they changed the rules on independent contractor definition, but it made it fuzzy, and it's in litigation now. It's going to be a couple years before it clears up. Who knows what the world will look like by the time that all clears up. So so far at the federal level, you don't need to change it. But in California, it is messy, and I agree, it's not. Yeah, and what happened is that the entrepreneurs had no voice in that issue, right? They didn't realize the bands playing in the bar every week, right? The people with house cleaning gigs, like that would all get impacted by that stuff. So it's a real issue, and the voice of the entrepreneur wasn't in that process.
Any last questions? Yep.
In terms of workforce loans, the tension between high-road training partnerships and the high-wage, high-benefit jobs and the incentives that come from the RIO dollars versus this conversation of a gig worker, independent contractor who doesn't usually receive those benefits. Like, that's where the justice issue is like who gets what benefits, but there's a lot of money and a lot of policy efforts around HRTP in the state that we do in terms of like apprenticeship models and those types of things, which is workforce. And then entrepreneurship side, gig work is important because there's not always a lot of money in startups. So you're looking to do those ventures, the freedom of choice for the worker, but then the perspective of equity. Like, are you looking at that lens? Or how do you detangle that?
Yeah, so we haven't gone into, because it's so much, right, to get into that. But I think overall, the distinction we have in the country between independent contractor, exempt worker, non-exempt worker, it's very industrial era thinking. Because if you look at the way most startups happen, if people they put in their time to something, they don't count their hours, they're just trying to get it going. You start to see people pool their time together more and more. And at some point they realize, oh, we have to start thinking about who's exempt and who's non-exempt. Oh, we have to start thinking about, is someone a contractor because what percentage of their time are we using? And what is the work and how does it get managed? And in a real startup situation, that's so dynamic. So we should really be treating companies of a few people very differently from a company of even 20 people or 10 people. 3 people working in an office don't think of themselves as exempt or non-exempt. Often they're just doing it on sweat equity too. So we don't have that spectrum of definitions to match the reality. So we have very industrial era classifications of independent contractor, exempt, non-exempt, as opposed to startup-y phases where the lines are very, very blurry and we shouldn't apply the same rules. So I think that's a whole reset that needs to happen. We're not even tackling that yet because that's huge, because that's essentially a rethinking of the entire labor categories. But some point that needs to happen in America because it doesn't match where the country's economy is now, right? Which is you want that dynamic flow of people in entrepreneurial environments where they don't have to start, those measurements don't make sense. They just simply don't fit within the way startups work. What do you think?
I think it's a tension, right? Because there's a lot of funding that goes to these larger organizations that allow them to accelerate, but that doesn't go with the same investments. You can't go to workforce board and get a decent chunk of change from them. So we end up going with venture dollars, or if you're a nonprofit, you go with grant funding. And so just the array of the different ways that any business model is funded is broad and confusing in itself, depending on what your mission is and how you structure it as a B Corp, C Corp, or you're going nonprofit route, or these other corporations, once you're large, yeah, there's lots of ways to partner with cities, counties, and get that state money. But when you're small, you know, it's really sweat equity, your friends and family seed, and then luckily, if you can get to a round, you know, then it's how do you recoup that, and how do we incentivize a fund where it's easy to get access to? Because I've done a couple startups, and the hardest part is that first dollar, right? And actually getting revenue. I can gather people to work hours and hours on sweat equity, but getting that model to actually fly and then pay for people's time and then grow, then you're starting to get more complex as an organization. You shift from entrepreneurship thinking to like organizational design and structure, and it just there's a lot to that transition. So it seems like for me, the way I think about it is like I'm really good at a certain part of it, which is ideation, early stage startup, getting people thinking and going. But then once you start wanting to go into like workforce development partnerships, it's a different client, different conversation, and a different hat that I have to even wear. I have multiple companies to wear different hats on different conversations on different funding streams, because I can't have a single organization to have that broad economic workforce conversation across all those spectrums and colors and columns.
Yeah.
So that's where it's annoying as a workforce ecosystem builder to try to be everything to everybody, which you can't live in one hat.
Yeah. Yeah, yes. So all that is true. And the truth is there isn't a lot of funding going towards entrepreneurial ecosystem development right now, but there's tons of money going to workforce training and large company economic development efforts. And so those need to be redirected, because you got to work with the system as it is, you know, whether you love it or not, it's the way it is. And so we have to educate, we have to show people that there's a better way to achieve the ends that they say they want to achieve. But that's going to take time. But it is a lot of citizen engagement in the process that we need to encourage. But yes, it's a long journey, but it's hard for sure.
2 years ago, I started trying to have this conversation with our local WIA, because their region covers a lot, same region that I have, several counties, lots of counties. They have 11, I have like 12. But that they didn't even want to have a conversation. I'm like, if the data shows you that the majority of all net new jobs are built by entrepreneurs, then it would be really great if we could have a conversation about what workforce dollars we put towards that. Right now, but again, it's like, no, I can only fill this job. I can only fill this job. It felt so repetitive. So I didn't try too hard past that. But this is another thing. Like if I think about like what Heather and I had to listen to today, right? There's a very large employer, a couple of counties over, that did a very quick layoff, 300 people. So they're doing rapid response stuff, all the normal things you would do, like here's your EDD, here's how you do your cover, this is all the things, right? But they're trying to do something different. They're trying to say, hey, how do we help these people, and how do we help incentivize these people beyond, and to look at all the opportunities, right? And can you please help us, because we want to have entrepreneurial conversations with them as well. Yeah, we'll help, we're here. Can you help us have conversations around the silvers or not, like for people who might be affected around that particular business, who support that business, but maybe are aging out, right? I think that your response earlier, or your suggestion earlier about we need more entrepreneurs on workforce development boards, it sounds great. I don't know how easy. Like I thought to myself, ooh, you know, this will be great.
Well, you think about how do people get appointed to positions, right? That's you know, getting involved in the civic process, getting to know candidates, right? Becoming trusted advisors to mayors. Yeah, so it's not easy, right? But it can be done. And we need to actually, this is the longer term vision, is to actually train a farm team of people that start doing that. Like, why not, right?
I really like that suggestion, and I think it could be applicable as well.
So you can pioneer it for us in Chico.
Yeah.
Because, well, you love pioneering stuff, Eva, so. Get arrows. Yeah, it's California. We all got arrows in the background. But yeah, we would love, if there's someone that can try that out, we'll support, we'll provide all the resources we can to, and air cover we can for something like that.
People that are actually getting ready to retire from that board.
Oh.
It's like,
Yeah, do you know an entrepreneur in there? And then what we can do and help is to think about, all right, what are the policies, or how do they approach that role? And how can they educate the rest of the board on these issues, right? And that could be a model for other places. So we're happy to help. with that. So new idea.
All right, so I'll steal from 1 million cups for the last question. What can we do as a community to support you in your efforts?
Oh, wow. I love that question. Well, the statement of principles, we really want to get this out there because this is like the gateway drug to kind of say, look, if you believe in this, sign this and share it out. So if you can share this with your networks, post it on LinkedIn, post it on Facebook, post it on video, even if you do a TikTok video about, hey, I signed the statement, get it out to people and share it. And we've got 1,000 signatures so far. I want to get to DC having many thousands of signatures in a few weeks. So if you could help me do that, that would be huge.
Sounds good. Well, let's give it up for Victor, and thanks for joining us in Sacramento.
Thank you.
And thank you all for being here.
And you guys are lucky to have this guy here. This guy's amazing. Thank you, Cameron.
And the librarian will tell you when you have to leave, as you heard, but feel free to hang out. We still have some food and would love to have a little networking if you're able to stay. So thank you.
Yes, sir.
Oh, yes, for sure. I was excited. I was always going to come to see your work and the work you're talking about.
No, you're good.